They came at dawn, 3 guys in gray uniforms, a repo order, and not a single word of explanation beyond the legal paperwork. Owen Callahan just stood outside, watching them slap a foreign padlock onto his own workshop. 22 years of sweat, 17 years building a solid reputation, 4 years building a secure future for his kid, gone in 12 minutes because of a signature on a predatory loan. But just 3 weeks later, their own $2 million armored truck broke down on a deserted highway, with $42 million locked deep inside. And the only person they could call was Owen Callahan. What happens when the man they ruined is the only mechanic alive who can solve their massive problem? At 33, Owen Callahan was a single dad who never did anything halfway. He grew up watching his own father wrenching on heavy fleet trucks at a county yard. He learned the difference between a torque spec and a guess before he even had a license. Then he spent 20 years mastering a heavy-duty skill set other mechanics wouldn't dare touch. Owen didn't fix ordinary cars. He specialized in armored transports, high-value security rigs, and heavy-duty tactical vehicle platforms. The exact machines governments and private firms trusted with cargo they absolutely could not lose. Those advanced skills started back when he contracted at Fort Bragg. He spent 6 years there, working with military engineers to harden vehicle security systems, before deciding he wanted to be his own boss. By the time he opened his Raleigh shop on Meridian Street, he already had a long waiting list, and those clients were far from ordinary. His garage wasn't huge by any industry standard. Just 3 working bays and a parts storage room he had organized with clinical perfect precision, plus a tiny front office with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a coffee pot brewing 12 hours a day. But what his shop lacked in size, it easily made up for in pure reputation. Owen held 3 major annual service contracts with regional armor companies. He certified transport fleets for a mid-sized shipping firm that needed strict federal compliance, plus a high-end private client list built entirely on word of mouth. He never spent a dime on advertising. Working 6 days a week, he still couldn't keep up with the incoming jobs. His workbenches held tools worn down by decades of honest hard labor. The floor bore deep oil stains, the kind that only form after years of tackling complex mechanical problems in one spot without ever cutting a single corner. He had built a real, thriving business, and he knew it. Not because of any praise, but because the heavy work never stopped coming. The equipment financing had seemed completely reasonable at first. He secured a heavy equipment loan through Meridian Capital Holdings, buying a massive hydraulic lift and a complex diagnostic system capable of reading the specialized security software wired inside heavy armored vehicles. The rate was high, but the flexible terms let him protect his monthly cash flow. Within 18 months, that new gear had entirely paid for itself. But he never expected how ruthlessly they would act the moment a client fell slightly behind. He only missed 2 payments. It started when a massive contract got held up by a client's surprise internal audit. He asked Meridian Capital twice to restructure, once in writing and once by phone. Both requests were flatly denied without giving a single reason. The third notice showed up on a Tuesday morning, carrying a threat of repossession, a timeline giving him 11 days to clear $97,000 or surrender his secured assets. Owen read the cold words 3 times before quietly setting them on his desk. Then he went right back to repairing the hydraulic actuator on his workbench. He was never the type of man to panic easily. He had survived far worse in his past, where the price of failing was measured in lives, not dollars. And he had learned that the only real response to a crisis was to keep doing his job. He phoned a local small business attorney that afternoon and left a brief message. Then he pulled out the gay original paperwork, spending 2 hours reading every single clause, even the sections he had glossed over before, penciling notes next to anything that caught his eye. He spotted a specific section, Clause 14, called the priority maintenance right, a special term he had insisted on back during the initial negotiations. Back then, it just looked like a bit of routine protection. He reviewed it twice, put it away, and forgot about it for 3 weeks. Sebastian Drake was 41 years old, and the scariest thing about the man was how completely harmless he always appeared. He ran things as operations director with the cold energy of someone checking off a list. He was calm, precise, and totally detached from any sort of human emotion. The man never raised his voice or made direct threats. He simply moved financial paperwork and seized valuable assets like an accountant filing a routine quarterly report. And if his cold action stripped a father of the shop he had spent his life building, well, that was just what the ledger demanded. Years of experience had taught him that the most effective way to take over was to make absolutely sure that every single step was procedurally perfect, looking like nothing more than common industry practice on paper. But when you looked at the whole picture, the pattern was predatory. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was too late to stop him. What nobody outside of his close inner circle knew was that Sebastian also kept a highly secret, highly profitable consulting job with a rival logistics company that was eager to aggressively expand its physical footprint in the local market. Owen's specialized garage, with its loyal clients and elite gear, was exactly the prize they wanted to steal. Why build a facility from scratch when you can just steal a repossessed one for cheap? And Owen's countdown clock was already ticking. Adrian Voss rolled up to the garage at 7:14 on a Thursday morning, flanked by 2 agents and carrying a thick stack of repossession papers. He was 35, their cold-hearted expert in taking back assets. He had ruined enough lives to have developed a perfectly numb, robotic routine for it. He checked off every tool on the inventory list as they locked the doors, letting him sign it away, never expecting they would soon desperately need his unique skills. He didn't make the mistake of offering any sympathy. No explanations either. Experience taught him that words only drag things out. Owen signed every paper without a fight. He knew the law, and he knew there was no ground left to stand on. Standing in the office doorway, he watched them lock up his first service bay, then the second, then the third, and finally his parts room. Every padlock snapping shut had its own distinct pitch, and Owen memorized every single one of them. The whole thing took 12 minutes. When they finished, Adrian Voss handed him the final inventory paperwork. He pointed out the number for appeals, then walked to his car without looking back once. Owen lingered in the empty doorway for a second, then quietly headed to his truck. He had already packed his own hand tools into the truck bed the night before. Legally, personal hand tools weren't classified as secured assets. They couldn't touch his livelihood. He had his phone and whatever tools he could carry, along with a scribbled copy of that bad loan agreement folded in his pocket. But he also possessed something else, a sharp memory he hadn't fully processed yet. Right before they sealed the final bay door, he'd spotted a heavy truck parked just 2 houses down. A late-model armored truck painted midnight blue. It bore an unfamiliar logo on the side panel, one he made a mental note to research later. Vanguard Secure Transport. He filed the name away, not knowing why. Just like a seasoned mechanic files away an odd sound. A faint knock he hasn't identified yet, storing it without any immediate urgency. Because years on the job taught him that small details always matter eventually. 3 weeks dragged by the way brutal weeks always do, never easy and always carrying a heavy cost. He set up a makeshift shop in the empty parking lot of an old grocery store on Raleigh's east side, where the owner had agreed to let him use the asphalt for a low, flat monthly rate that he could actually manage. He spread out tarps and set up his portable tool racks, taking only the basic jobs he could manage without heavy lifts or computers. Brake jobs, changing fluids, and basic repairs for the loyal clients who trusted him enough to follow him out into the open air. But the work that truly defined him, the high-end diagnostic jobs, the armored fleet maintenance, the advanced firmware-level tuning, was completely impossible in an open-air lot. He pushed forward anyway. Giving up wasn't in his nature, so he didn't even consider it. He wasn't the type to complain or share his struggles with anyone. This was his reality, and his only way out was to keep grinding and keep planning his next move. He reached out to a couple of equipment leasing firms trying to secure a long-term rental on a portable hydraulic lift. His lawyer confirmed that the bank's rejection of his loan restructure looked highly suspicious. But proving fraud would take time and a deep paper trail. Owen organized the evidence with the same meticulous precision he used on complex engines, keeping every document stored in a waterproof sleeve inside his glove box, protecting his case so nothing would get ruined out here in the dust and wind of the parking lot. By the fourth night, he was studying that loan agreement once again. He was sitting on a folding chair with a flashlight, huddled in the dark after they took his garage. And when he finally reached Clause 14, he stared at the page under the beam for a long time. The fine print stated that within 90 days of them seizing his shop, if they used his repossessed property to run their commercial operations, he still held the legal right to be offered the service and maintenance contracts on his seized assets. Owen had written that in because he once saw a bank seize a mechanic's tools only to greedily cash in on the very work they took. He had wanted real protection. He got it in writing, but until he sat in that dark parking lot with his flashlight, he had almost forgotten about it, not knowing they would soon desperately need his genius. But he wrote that clause number in the margin of his notepad and circled it twice. And for tonight, that was enough. Meanwhile, corporate owner Madison Clark turned 28 in April, spending her birthday morning working, reviewing secure fleet insurance renewals, because business always came before everything else. She had not inherited Vanguard Secure Transport. She built it herself from a small 3-vehicle security company, using her own savings and borrowed cash, and worked tirelessly for over 4 long years before she was finally old enough to feel confident running the show, while they forced Owen to survive under plastic tarps in a cold parking lot. Her company operated 21 heavy armored carriers serving massive financial institutions, private equity firms, and logistics networks across 5 states. Madison had zero actual mechanical background. What she had was an incredible eye for risk. She understood on a structural level how systems fail, and she built her entire secure fleet operations protocol around that understanding. She ran a highly disciplined company, expecting that same perfection from every vendor she dealt with. And she had a deeply developed, fierce hatred for cases where a preventable failure was not avoided. The high-tech truck in question was the newest addition to her fleet, a ballistic Series 7 armored vehicle, custom-built, bought for over $2 million and delivered 4 months ago, with full corporate certified warranty. That Series 7 truck was an incredibly sophisticated machine. Its vault utilized a 3-layer, electromagnetic locking system that could never be manually bypassed without a special security sequence. Its wheels incorporated run flat technology paired with an automatic tire pressure module that monitored and adjusted pressure in real time across different highway conditions. Its computer diagnostic code was strictly proprietary, built to communicate only with official corporate equipment secured by lockdown firmware. Management software that controlled how all the truck's computers talked to each other. In short, it was a beast that trusted very few people and made no apologies. The secure run that morning involved a scheduled delivery of secure bonds belonging to a private investment consortium, $42 million in secure assets that had to reach a Durham bank by evening. The route was standard, the run routine, and the guard crew highly experienced. 80 kilometers into the trip, on a lonely stretch of highway between Raleigh and Durham, their fancy truck simply stopped. Not from a mechanical failure any wrench could fix. The engine was fine, the fuel system intact, the drive shaft undamaged. Instead, the entire electronic architecture of the vehicle entered a locked fault state. The high-tech electromagnetic cargo locks refused to disengage. The tire pressure control module started broadcasting a critical system error that their expensive screens couldn't resolve. And the diagnostic screen cycled through endless error codes that none of the crew or the 2 technicians dispatched from Vanguard's operations center had ever encountered in any setup. The truck was indestructible, sure, but completely useless to them now. It couldn't move. Madison got the call in her office at 11:47 in the morning. She asked 3 quick corporate questions. Was the cargo secure? Was the crew safe? And who was en route to fix the fault? But the answer to that last question was that their field technicians were already there, waiting for the manufacturer to respond. Madison set the phone down and stared blankly at the wall for 4 long seconds before picking it back up. She knew their official field response times by heart. She had read the warranty documentation herself. 72 hours minimum for a critical systems lockout with active cargo. But her delivery contract required arrival within 14 hours of departure. 3 hours and 11 minutes had already passed, and none of those minutes were coming back. Their field techs plugged in their diagnostic gear, and the truck locked them out entirely. The Series 7's military-grade security firmware had an automatic interference protocol designed to block unauthorized access to the electronic systems during transport. Any diagnostic device that was not manufacturer certified triggered a deep automatic lockdown at the firmware level, meaning the rig wouldn't communicate with anything not whitelisted in its system registry. Those 3 Vanguard techs only had gear for basic routine maintenance, not for a high-tech firmware nightmare of this complexity. The nearest authorized dealer was a 2-hour drive away in Charlotte, and their top diagnostic guy held only a basic Level 2 certification. The master Level 3 technician they needed was based all the way in Atlanta. Vanguard's operations center called the factory's emergency line, only to be told that an exception to the 72-hour timeline required sign-off from 3 separate departments, including their legal team, because of third-party cargo. The manager wrote down the numbers, stared at them, and then tossed them aside because they were completely useless. Levi Nash had worked in armored vehicle logistics for 21 years, and he was not a man who wasted time on panic. 55, broad-shouldered and steady, he possessed the quiet confidence of a man who knew that panic never solved a crisis, only methodical thinking did. He ran Vanguard's field operations as Madison's most senior director. Now he sat in the crisis room, watching every single corporate option close on him. They were about to need his skills. Levi leaned back, scanning his memory for details the official manuals completely ignored. 6 months back, before Vanguard contracted their current useless fleet maintenance team, a deal struck right after Meridian Capital seized control of those local Raleigh assets. Back then, there was a independent local mechanic who handled the tough safety inspections, testing 2 aging armored trucks for a logistics firm Levi used to advise. That mechanic spotted a critical hydraulic failure in one of the heavy vehicles, one the factory inspectors had foolishly cleared weeks earlier. Levi remembered his name. Outsmarting corporate factory engineers was no minor achievement in this business. And in this business, tiny overlooked oversights always had a way of blowing up on the road. He scrolled to the contact notes in his phone. Owen Callahan, Meridian Street, Raleigh. Levi presented the contact details to Madison, keeping his tone carefully flat as he explained. But Owen Callahan did not own a garage anymore. Meridian Capital had repossessed his business just 3 weeks prior. Madison stared at Levi, then slowly turned her gaze toward Sebastian Drake across the table. He had quietly joined their crisis meeting 40 minutes ago, analyzing the mess in his typical slow, deliberate style. She gave a simple order: find him. Drake immediately pulled out his phone and typed a quick text to Adrian Voss. Owen was resting on a folding chair in an empty lot when his phone rang at 3:15. The incoming number was unfamiliar, but he picked up anyway. The cold voice on the line belonged to Adrian Voss, the very executive who stood in Owen's shop weeks ago, reading off inventory lists while Owen signed his life away. Voss used his usual slick tone, disguising demands as simple favors while leaving absolutely no room for a refusal. Owen just listened silently. He let Voss explain the broken truck, the useless computer diagnostics, the tight deadline, and the critical contract on the line. Once the corporate speech finally ended, Owen had just one question. Was this broken truck owned by Vanguard Secure Transport, the parent company tied directly to Meridian Capital Holdings? Voss hesitantly confirmed it. Owen promised a callback, laid the phone on his lap, and left it there for 31 minutes. Those 31 minutes were not filled with bitter rage, nor were they spent scheming. He just sat there, hands on his knees, reflecting on his personal philosophy of hard work. He believed a broken truck stranded on the road simply needed to be repaired, and ownership did not change the fact that he was the only one who could fix it. But he also knew that entering a mess caused by the very elites who took his livelihood and asking for absolutely nothing to bail them out was something he refused to ever do again. He had demands now, not out of greed or a desire for revenge, but because he was a master mechanic who knew his worth and had spent the past 3 painful weeks being reminded of what happens when you let greedy bank executives dictate your value. 31 minutes was plenty of time to recognize the difference. When Owen finally made his call, he ignored Adrian Voss completely. He opened the Vanguard website, searched for the corporate directory, and dialed the direct line to the chief executive officer. Madison Clark answered on the second ring, which surprised the dispossessed mechanic. Owen introduced himself, confirming he had already spoken with Adrian Voss. He agreed to drive out to the stranded vehicle and assess the damage. Then he laid out his hard terms without any preamble. His first condition required 30% of his diagnostic fee up front, transferred before he even arrived on site, whether he fixed the problem or not. His second condition was that no Vanguard technicians and no Meridian Capital representatives could be present in his immediate workspace during the assessment. He would work entirely alone, and that deal was not up for negotiation. Madison agreed to the first term without a moment of hesitation. She went silent for 5 seconds, then agreed to make sure he worked alone. Owen thanked her. He rose from his folding chair and packed his tools with the focused precision of a master craftsman who knew exactly what he would need. He drove to the scene in his 12-year-old truck, which needed a wheel bearing but remained reliable. The stranded vehicle sat on the highway shoulder surrounded by a ring of orange cones. 2 Vanguard security guards held the line while 3 baffled corporate technicians stood near the front of the carrier, looking completely defeated and wearing the unmistakable posture of men out of ideas. Owen parked behind the very last cone. He got out and slowly walked the entire perimeter of the machine before touching anything. He studied the tires and measured the undercarriage clearance. He inspected the camera housings and the rubber seals on the cargo bay door. He crouched down by the front left wheel to inspect the tire pressure sensor housing. He stood up and closely examined the rear cargo bay latch assembly. Then he opened his toolkit. He took out a compact device roughly the size of a paperback book and plugged it into a port beneath the driver's side running board. One of the Vanguard technicians muttered loudly enough for him to hear that the vehicle had already rejected every tool they tried. Owen did not respond. What Owen had connected was no standard corporate diagnostic tool. It was a low-level CAN bus reader, the hidden network that lets a modern vehicle's electronic modules talk directly to one another. Standard scanners worked by querying the vehicle's high-level error reporting system, which the Series 7 security firmware had locked down completely. Owen's device never tried to talk to the high-level system. It simply listened to the raw data, catching the raw traffic moving through the lowest layer of the system, just like pressing an ear to a wall instead of knocking on the front door. He had built this custom modification himself during an old contract, analyzing electronic evidence inside a severely damaged vehicle. It was only one of a dozen custom tools in his kit that had absolutely no commercial equivalent. The data streaming back was dense, and to anyone without deep experience in armored electronics, it would have been completely unreadable. To Owen, the raw stream told a clear story within 8 minutes. He stepped over to the cargo door sensor housing and popped the panel off with a flat blade tool. The third impact sensor in the array, a tiny sensor built to trigger a lockdown when it detected a crash force. It carried a residue that wasn't road grime, hydraulic fluid, or normal wear. Owen tilted the metal housing to catch the afternoon light, closely inspecting the film on its surface. It was board cleaner, a chemical solvent he recognized the second he smelled it. The solvent cheap replacement mechanics used to strip circuit boards during fast inspections. Fine for a basic garage job, but incredibly stupid to use near armored sensors because he knew it. Conducted a current under extreme road heat, sending a fake crash signal to the computer. A ghost crash. A reading that would lock the entire armored vehicle down in an endless loop, requiring a secret manual reset sequence that the corporate Vanguard team had no clue how to access. Their new fleet mechanics had ruined the housing with the wrong product. The chemical layer dried to near invisibility, but once the armored vehicle reached high operating temperatures on the highway, it fooled the system into thinking it was under attack. He set the part down, turning back to analyze their system data. The next clue took 22 minutes of analyzing files from 3 days before the transport. Someone had pushed a shady firmware update to the tire pressure controller. Naturally, the change was hidden from their official maintenance records. Done through a local port, using logins from their new expensive Raleigh service provider. The corporate firm that had stole his fleet contracts after they took his garage and crushed his business. It looked totally routine, but it hid a tiny subroutine that jammed the communication loop between the tire pressure module and the vault locks if both glitched together. It was a hidden glitch that would never trigger under normal driving conditions. It needed 2 separate errors to hit at the exact same time. And someone had made absolutely sure those 2 errors would hit together. Owen began the fix, working methodically without rushing, and without letting the watching suits know what he was doing. First, he cut the corrupted impact sensor out of the circuit. He dried the contacts and cleaned them with the correct solvent from his personal toolkit. Then he initiated a manual override of the security lockdown system using a complex boot sequence found only in the rare Series 7 manual. Private manuals that high-paying corporate dealers could never access. But things Owen learned back when he helped build these machines, working side by side with the lead engineer who designed the platform. The hacked code was a much tougher fix. He couldn't simply erase the hack. Doing that without official corporate tools would run the risk of bricking the truck's entire operating system. Instead, he coded a custom patch to bypass the glitch, uploading it through the service port, slipping right past their high-tech security, fixing their massive mistake using the raw expertise they tried to throw away. His code patch was just 41 lines. It took him 16 minutes to write and 4 to verify. Barely 1 hour and 42 minutes after Owen plugged in his tools. The armored cargo lock system finally cycled through. It released with a quiet hydraulic hiss, and the dashboard's diagnostic screen flickered. The screen cleared its red errors, settling on a steady green operational status. Not one of those fancy corporate technicians said a word. Owen unplugged his gear, wiped down the sensor housing, and secured the cover. Then he stood, grabbed his heavy toolbox, and stared straight at the camera on the truck, the lens broadcasting a live feed right to corporate headquarters. He held that silent stare for 3 seconds. This was not a show, he was making a final decision. Reaching into his grease-stained work jacket, he pulled out a flash drive. He plugged it into the same interface port, pulling a complete raw copy of the secure system data log. Then he walked back to his rig, ignoring the silent corporate suits on the highway shoulder. Later that night, Owen sent the operations director a single quiet email. It contained the complete annotated system log paired with just 3 short lines. Sharp technical notes proving how the sensors were ruined and where foreign code crept in. No demands, no extra words. He hit send at 9:47, then climbed into the back of his truck to sleep. His cheap temporary rental did not allow overnight stays. Madison opened the file at 11. She read his notes twice, then immediately called Levi Nash. By midnight, they traced the malicious firmware upload straight to its source. It came from an account used by Vanguard's new fleet maintenance provider, the very outfit that took over the armored fleet contracts after Meridian Capital seized Owen's shop. Even the chemical residue matched. It was the exact solvent the new mechanics used during their last inspection of the Series 7. Just 2 days before the transport run, Levi pulled the system logs and spotted 2 more glaring red flags in the records. Several entries had been modified, and one was completely wiped from the system. Madison sat looking at the cold evidence on her desk, whispering 3 quiet words to herself. This was sabotage. The corporate motive made perfect sense once she looked at the money. The delivery contract was bound by a brutal delay penalty. Every hour of delay past a 6-hour limit triggered a massive fee, forcing Vanguard to forfeit 0.5% of the shipment's value directly to the client. On a $42 million cargo, those losses were massive. But those penalty fees weren't the real threat. The real target was their massive 3-year contract, worth vastly more than any single delivery run. And keeping that massive deal required this single delivery to go smoothly. If Vanguard failed this run, the entire multi-million-dollar deal vanished instantly. The competing firm positioned to take over that contract was backed by the very group that took Owen's shop. They had been funding this rival through shell companies for 14 months. Sebastian Drake was listed as a key advisor to that shell company. A paper trail their legal team dug up in under 40 minutes, once Owen showed them where to look. Madison phoned Sebastian Drake at 7:15 the next morning, demanding his presence in the boardroom by 9. She kept her reasons to herself. The moment he walked in, she dropped the evidence on the table, the firmware logs and maintenance records. She showed him the money trail between Meridian and their rival, demanding an explanation. Sebastian Drake gave a slick, overly technical answer that dodged the real issue. The maintenance company was already facing an internal investigation. He claimed he had no role in their technical work. That suspicious firmware upload was under review. He kept his voice cool and steady, the way he always did under pressure. Madison listened, her face completely blank. Then she dropped the hammer. She had sent everything to the State Oversight Commission and filed a formal complaint. Drake walked out of the conference room without making a deal. Once in the hallway, he checked his phone and saw an urgent alert from Meridian Capital's legal team. A legal injunction blocking the garage seizure was filed that morning, using Clause 14 of their contract. Vanguard didn't file it, it was Owen Callahan fighting for his life's work. His legal argument was dead simple. Owen's lawyer claimed that Meridian Capital violated their own contract when they transferred his seized garage directly to a sister company instead of offering it at a public auction like the law actually required. They rushed the transfer in just 11 days, never giving Owen a real chance to buy back his shop. That priority clause. Their maintenance rights were rigged by a group who stood to make a fortune off the cheat. The lawsuit also exposed the firmware hack and the shady mechanics, and their clear involvement, turning a simple contract dispute into a criminal matter the State Oversight Commission had to investigate. They immediately launched an investigation into Meridian Capital's entire repossession business. Not just Owen's case, but a massive audit of all their shady seizures over the last 26 months. Madison Clark signed the 3-year deal with the bond consortium 10 days later. The shipment arrived 90 minutes late, safely inside the emergency window that Levi Nash had triggered, using a clause that protected them from unexpected mechanical breakdowns beyond their control. But that clause required proof. And Owen's detailed mechanic logs were the exact proof they used to back up the claim, and the client accepted it instantly. Vanguard suspended the shady maintenance provider's contract. During the investigation, Levi Nash drafted a bold new proposal for the executive board, urging them to sign a direct service contract with a real independent master mechanic instead of some corrupt corporate middleman. That proposal named Owen Callahan. It offered him upfront funding to cover all the startup costs of building a brand new workshop, advanced directly against his future contract. Madison signed off on it Thursday afternoon, bypassing the board entirely. She didn't call Owen with the news, she just sent a quick email. The subject line was just a reference number. 2 cold sentences followed. The settlement was officially done, his old life gone. The service fees and remaining capital were finally wired to his account. She signed it with just her initials. That was her way of doing business when things were settled and required no discussion. He read the email on a cold Saturday morning in his truck, a paper cup of coffee forgotten beside him. He read it once, placed his phone on the tool rack and stared out at the sky. Then he picked up his phone and scrolled through the loyal clients who had called during those 7 long weeks, just asking when he would reopen. There were 19 of them. He went down the list carefully, noting what each person needed and checking if the jobs were still waiting for his touch. Once finished, he tucked the folded notebook safely into his heavy jacket pocket. He had phone calls to make come Monday. The new shop sat on Meridian Street, just 4 doors down from his stolen garage. It was smaller, with only 2 bays instead of 3, forcing him to keep his parts tightly organized. The front office had barely enough space to squeeze in a desk and a filing cabinet. He got the keys on Monday morning and backed his truck right up to the rear entrance. He unloaded his heavy tools onto the floor of the first bay. Then he spent the next 4 hours organizing them exactly as he had done for 17 years. The shelves were unfamiliar, the walls painted a completely different color. The brand new overhead lights shone much brighter than his old shop, but the concrete floor was still bare. And once his personal tools were laid out, the space started to feel familiar, the way honest workspaces always do. Not because of how they look, but because of the hard work done inside them. He had rebuilt from scratch before, in far worse places than this. He knew exactly how to start over. 6 days after the review went public, the corporate suit Sebastian Drake resigned from Meridian Capital to pursue other things. The investigators interrogated Adrian Voss. He was questioned twice, hiring a defense lawyer before his second intense session. The cheap contractor that snatched up Owen's stolen contracts lost its license after federal inspectors found 3 more technical violations on fleet vehicles they had falsely signed off as certified. The deeper audit of Meridian Capital's repossession portfolio uncovered 11 files where seized assets were shuffled to shadow partners without disclosure, triggering massive legal consequences that would crawl forward at the agonizing speed they always do. Slow, cold, and entirely blind to the suffering of real people. He ignored their corporate downfall. His lawyer handled all the court filings. Instead, he worked, calling back the 19 loyal clients from his list. He booked everyone who still needed real service. And he politely let go of 2 who found other mechanics, because he never expected loyalty from folks he had been unable to help for 7 long weeks. Then the first massive Vanguard vehicle arrived on a Friday for its routine inspection. An older model from their fleet. A heavy carrier that had been kept running past its retirement date due to sudden budget cuts. But he inspected it with the unmatched skill they had tried so hard to steal from him. Spotted a second leak. A hydraulic seal showing fatigue stress, an issue their other mechanics had completely missed. He documented it perfectly. Then he sent over the report with a fair, accurate estimate and a replacement recommendation that needed 0 explanation. Late on a chilly Tuesday, he sat in the front office after the main bay lights went down, quietly reviewing the next week's schedule. The coffee maker on his desk was the only survivor from his seized garage. He managed to pull it off the bank's cold repossession inventory list as a personal item during the painful appeals process, and the inspector had let it slide without argument. His new desk was a cheap, second-hand piece with a dent in the front corner that wasn't even worth fixing. Even the filing cabinet was brand new, lacking the heavy, familiar resistance of a drawer slid open over 1,000 times. Owen noted these details without any sentiment. Just a master craftsman sizing up a new, unfamiliar workspace. Simply registering what was there, and knowing what it would eventually become with enough time and grit. He refused to think about Sebastian Drake, or his life's work 3 blocks up, chained shut under a cheap bank padlock. Instead, he focused on the Series 7 quarterly review in 8 days, wondering if that firmware glitch had been fully fixed by the factory's official patch, or if a dangerous conflict subroutine still remained. One he had temporarily bridged. Owen noted to demand the full manufacturer changelog before that vehicle ever entered his bay. His office light burned past 9 in the evening. Outside, the streets lay completely silent. He finished up his notes, capped his pen, and killed the light on his way out. With work waiting tomorrow, he saw no point in staying awake a minute longer than necessary. The front door locked behind him with a clean, solid click, a sound that belonged to him.